Hi there, and welcome to a new episode of Impact Talks. Today we have a great guest, Abby Marks-Beale. She's a speed reading expert as well as a former member board of directors for the National Center for Homeoepathy. She's written books like The Complete Idiot's Guide to Speed Reading, Success Skills, Strategies for Study and Lifelong Learning. I am super excited to have you for two things, obviously the speed reading, but as well as to explore the health aspects of entrepreneurs and people in general. Abby, please introduce yourself and what you do and how you started your entire journey.
That's a loaded question, Lova. Thanks for having me. So, I'm Abby Marks-Beale. I am a speed reading expert, but I used to hate to read. So, the story goes that when I was in high school, basically pretty much anyone can relate to when you're in actually elementary school, you get to read these wonderful fantasy books and fiction books and stories, and it's great. And then you enter middle school and they give you those textbooks that are just not much fun to read. And then you get into high school and off to college. And I was never really taught how to gain information, understand how to read from a nonfiction book. And so I really got turned off to reading. I loved it in elementary school. I would be in all those, reading clubs in the summertime. I would, count how many books that I read. But by middle school, it started to get a little bit less enjoyable. And so by the time I made it through high school and I went to college, I really disliked reading. I just never looked to it as something I would want to do to learn or to understand the world. To me, it was just really boring. And so I went to college, went 4 years, and it wasn't until after college that I had a degree and I had worked in the business world for about 3 years, two separate jobs where had hit a glass ceiling and I was not happy about it. And I just said, I got to figure out what else I would want to do, and applied for a job, just one job at the time. I lived in Boston, where they just said, have liberal arts degree, willing to travel, we will train. And I thought, perfect. That's exactly what I want. I was 26, I think, at the time. And little did I know that when I applied for this exciting opportunity, that they were going to teach me how to teach kids how to read speed reading, how to read faster, and study skills. And I was like, oh, really? Because it's almost like divine intervention. It's like, some universe said, you need to learn this. And so I ended up working for this company called READAK, READAK. They are still around. And they teach kids in private schools speed reading and study skills all around the world. So that's kind of how I got started in that. I mean, I could continue on the trajectory, but I didn't know how much more you wanted to hear at this point.
Yeah, no worries. So you're starting this journey around 26 years old, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What do you mean with a glass ceiling? What was happening in those other jobs that you decided to quit?
So I was working as an administrator. The first job I had was the first full time, I should say. I mean, I worked, through high school and college. But the first full time job I had was a sales administrator at a company that was doing fast food restaurant cash registers. Very exciting work. And I learned how to be an administrator, which, as the years progressed, was very helpful for being an entrepreneur.
Well, what does
But
an administrator do exactly?
administrator takes care of all the minutia, all the little stuff. We would do spreadsheets on sales things. We would color in menus for cash registers. This was a long time ago, before the digital age. I would be in touch with customers, customer service. There would be paperwork, a lot of the paperwork, a lot of the administrative stuff that's involved in a business, you know. And I was working there for about a year, and it was really clear to me that they had no interest in moving me anywhere. That my role was just to be a sales administrator, even though I had some good ideas and I wanted to contribute more. And so that's what I mean by glass ceiling. I mean, there was no place for me to go
Oh,
in the
so it
company.
wasn't like what we hear nowadays, like glass ceiling because you were a woman or something like that.
Yeah, I think it was because I was a woman, especially
Really? But
in the
why?
two
What
companies.
what was how do you know whether, well, maybe not the right question, but like how do you know that they weren't promoting you? Was there something in the way they were saying it? Did they literally say, hey, we're not going to promote you, maybe you should find a different job or something?
They never came out and at the time I didn't think about asking more than just like, hey, I'd really like to become, I forgot what it was. Maybe it was a salesperson, or maybe I wanted to go out in the field, or I wanted to do something more than sit in the office and just like take care of everyone else's business. And they were like, no, no, you need to stay here. This is where you belong. And I was like, but that's not what I want. And it was very,
That's
yeah,
pretty
it was just a
demeaning almost.
it was demeaning.
If somebody would have told me, like, hey, you belong in this job that you just started in your 20s for the rest of your life, I'd be like, what?
Yeah,
Yeah,
there was no
continue.
movement. There was just no movement for me.
So maybe we'll get back to that question, but do you think nowadays it's gotten better or worse for those type of jobs?
So I think that there's twofold if it was up to me. Now, granted, I have been an entrepreneur for over 30 years, so I have not been in the work world on purpose because I just like to have my own freedom to do what I want to do, and those 3 years taught me that. But I will say that I think part of it is that a lot of women don't have as much self-esteem that they should have, and that if I had the self-esteem that I have now, I probably would have gotten to different places within that company or even have chosen a different company. So I think part of it is just a woman's lack of self confidence is a part of why they may feel they hit a glass ceiling. Nowadays, there are definitely more women who are accepted. As you can tell, even at least here in the United States, that we have more women involved in politics. There's more women CEOs than there have been before. Whereas before, I mean, when 25, 30 years ago, that was just not the common thing. Women were meant to have babies and stay home and, take care of their spouses, and that was the way it was. So it's a different time now, but I do think it's a confidence issue.
I love that you say that because we did a Women in Tech event, and I did notice that the people who were getting into top five and were starting to win, it was mainly a difference in self-esteem. Obviously, you've been an entrepreneur for so long now, which is like amazing. Because if you read the statistics, most entrepreneurs stop after 3 years and get a job. I think after 5 years, it's more than half. After 10
Hmm.
years, like 90% or something like that.
Hmm.
So, how obviously we're going to go into speed reading, but it's a really interesting topic, which is super relevant that I've seen at our Women in Tech event. How, looking back with your experience now, what kind of tips would you give younger women who are getting a career now? Um, what kind of tips would you give them to gain self-esteem?
Wow, it's such a different world now. I have two sons, 22 and 25, and I see, the work world that they, are entering in and dabbling in. They do have the entrepreneurial bug, both of them. So it's going to, I don't think they're going to ever work for anyone else on any 9 to 5 basis, that's for sure. But I think in terms of for a woman, they really have to be clear for themselves who they are and what they want, and not just I need a job, because there's a difference between a job and a career. And sometimes you need to have a couple of jobs before you find the career, and that's okay as long as you know that that's your trajectory. So I think it's about getting some experience and then doing some soul searching and figuring what is it that I really want to do? What's the effect that I want to have on my life and other people? And then go for it, because having a conviction and a passion is going to get you at least happiness. Maybe not a job, but it'll get you happiness, and that sometimes supersedes getting paid. So having that ability to know is important.
Is that the same advice you give your sons as well? Because obviously
Yeah,
raising entrepreneurs is pretty intense, I can imagine.
yeah. We pretty much give them the freedom to explore as they need, and they're not lazy by any stretch. They will work, and they're both trying to figure out what eventually they're going to land in. And for now, it's like they don't have to have a career. I probably had probably 7 or 8 different, careers per se, before I actually landed where I am now. So, and that's okay. It's not like, unless you're an accountant or a lawyer, and even then, there are people who are former accountants and former lawyers that find other professions, but I think you can certainly dabble right now, figure it out.
So let's move on to the actual topic at hand, which is so you're joining this company and learning speed reading. What are kind of the first steps from you not wanting to read, which is obviously with my generation, it's a big thing as well. We don't really like reading that much. Well, at least I'm speaking for myself. It's pretty tough. Um, Even though I studied law and I know how to go through a ton of content,
Mm.
I can imagine just that switch from not wanting to read to actually starting to like it and implementing speed reading techniques. What were the first things they were teaching you in that job?
Well, the first thing we did was it was a month training, basically. It really wasn't long when you think about. We went to go then teach kids, but they had a curriculum, they had a workbook. But what they did was they taught me who I was as a reader. I didn't understand why I had issues with reading or what I could do to make it a better experience. I also had no idea what my reading speed was, and I thought I was like the slowest reader in the world. And when we did our first evaluation, I was like, I'm not the slowest reader in the world. How could that be? And why do I feel so inadequate with my reading skills? What happened during my educational years that got me to feel like it just wasn't good enough? And so once I learned better who I was as a reader and what I could do, then it was, and then to start teaching it to kids, which was interesting. It was grades 5 through 12. Mostly it was like grades 7 through 12 here in the States. That and learning their aha moments and things that they were attracted to. And then I was able to use my skills as I was traveling with this company to read. I would read my own stuff or I would practice what I was teaching to the kids. And it just like built up over time. And it was really cool, actually, you know.
So, so what happened during your education, and also what is a slow reader, what's a normal reader, and what's a fast reader?
I'm not sure what happened during my education. I think it's pretty common here that, you learn how to read, you sound it out, you hear it in your head, but then they never tell you that you don't have to do that anymore once you have a sight vocabulary, which is around seventh grade, and that you can make predictions, you can use different strategies. You don't have to sound out and hear every word in your head.
Wait, what's a sight vocabulary?
A sight vocabulary is when you look at a word and you know what it means because you have experience with it. It means it's not an unfamiliar word to you. You've seen it, you know what it means. It makes sense to you. So that's a sight word that you know. So this is like I do get calls from parents. My third grader wants to take your course. I'm like, they really have to have a more established vocabulary, not just verbally, but for the visual. They have to have a visual vocabulary so that they can look at a word and know what it means. Because you can't be efficient when you're sounding it out in your head still. If you have a big word that you've never seen before, that's a different story. But if all the words you're reading are big words, it's just going to frustrate you completely.
Don't most people, well, I know that when I read, I hear the word in my head. So
Mhm.
don't most people do it that way, or does everybody after the seventh grade have a sight vocabulary?
Well, they do have a sight vocabulary, but if they don't have any strategies in how to reduce that mental whispering or subvocalization that you're talking about, then you're going to be hearing every single word, which is not efficient. Not every word is equal in its meaning or that you need to spend time on when you read. So most of the time, your eyes will stop. Your eyes do two things when they read: they stop and they jump. And so when your eyes stop is when you pick up information, and when you jump is when you go from like one word to the next word. And so when you stop, you should be able to stop 4 times per second on average. So you should be able to read 4 words per second. Some people read only 2 words per second. Some people read 6 words per second. It just depends on how quickly they do it. But to think about having to hear the words in your head, you're going to always go slow. So a person who talks is around 100 to 150 words per minute. So right now I'm a New Yorker. I grew up in New York. So I talk on a little bit faster side. So I may be closer to 150 than 100. But, I'm around 150. So if you are going to read in the way that I'm speaking, you're going to be limited to about 150, maybe 200 words per minute. But if you can learn how to reduce the talking, you can't get rid of it. Once you have it, you're not going to get rid of it. But to say, I'm actually picking up a lot of information and then I'm hearing a word, and I pick up information and then I'm hearing a word. And so it's about having a strategy. I teach something called keywords. And so keywords is finding the most important words in text, usually 3 letters in length or longer. And it's like reading headlines of newspapers. It's basically you're getting the main concepts without all those little words like if, and, the, it, for, by, to. Those words, why stop on those? You know those words really well. And so it's about finding the bigger words and incorporating the little ones along with those bigger words. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. Does understanding go down when you, obviously, I read an article that you wrote. I saw it on LinkedIn. You posted about it, where obviously there's this difference between people who don't want to speed read because they need to understand a lot. And I remember during my law school experience, I heard that a lot. And then obviously there are people also during my law school experience, they just want to go through a book really quickly. So does understanding go down as you start speed reading, or how does that work?
When you first learn the strategies for being a more efficient reader, that's the way I'll pose it at the moment, that it's changing the conversation between your eyes and your brain. Your eyes and your brain have been functioning in a certain way for many, many years, and now you're trying to reestablish that conversation. And so there's a retraining, or I call it unlearning to relearn concept. And so when you start unlearning what you've been doing, it kind of messes you up a little bit. And so there's a temporary drop, at least in perceived comprehension. And within a short period of time of using a good strategy, the eyes and brain catch up with each other and they become more efficient. So it's kind of like a little bit of a roller coaster where you kind of like, you think you know what you're doing and then it goes down and then it comes back up again and then you do another strategy and then it goes down and then you come back up again when you use another strategy. And as you get better, it eventually goes upwards. So it's kind of like a directional going up over time as you become better at using the different strategies.
How long does it go down for?
It's really it should be temporary. So there's no exact number, but I can say from experience and training with people, when I first started training and did my own company, I used to have 15-hour classes that were 3 hours a time over 5 weeks. It was a beautiful way to train somebody. And then the world started to need the microwave version. Like, we don't have time, things are speeding up, we're not going to hire anybody to come in for a 15-hour class anymore. What can you give us? And so I ended up doing half-day classes, 4 hours, 1 4-hour class. What a difference that is. But I could say that in that 4-hour class, that there would be this temporary loss, but then the gain by the end of the 4 hours, at least the way that I designed the course. So there was this beginning perception that there is a way to make this work. It wasn't like I left them, at the depths of their, lack of comprehension. I designed it so that, look, let's dip it, let's see what works for you, and then come back up, at least enough so that you're going to be motivated to use this stuff.
So we're talking about a dip of a couple of hours, and then their reading speed went up as well as comprehension?
Yes. And so they were using the strategy. Once they had some practice, you have to have some experience with these different strategies. And so once you have some of that practice, the first couple of times it's very uncomfortable. So I'm going to use an analogy, and I use this, it's even in my online course, but the analogy really is about how everyone who reads, in effect, are like drivers. They all know how to drive. And everybody knows how to drive an automatic car. You just get in the car, you go. You know how to do it. Now, imagine for a moment that your automatic car breaks and you're like, uh-oh, I need to get to work. How am I going to get there? Your lovely neighbor has a stick shift car. It has 5 gears and it has 2 pedals instead of one, not just gas and brake, but you also have a clutch. And it's like all of a sudden, even though you know how to drive, you now have to be conscious about everything you do. You can't be on the phone, you can't have a sip of coffee. You are on completely, like, where's my foot? Where's my hand? Where are my eyes? The whole thing. And so in the beginning, it's very mechanical. So let's say you did do this and you drove to work. You got there, thankfully. Hopefully there weren't hills. They set you backwards. But you got to work and you're like, oh, thank goodness. At the end of the day, you get back in that same stick shift car. It's going to be a little bit easier. And by the end of that week, if you had to have that car for a week and you had to go back and forth to work, by the end of the week, it will be flowing much better. So the initial mechanical part of learning a new strategy is just like that. It's not that you can't read, it's just like all of a sudden we have to get you thinking about what you're doing instead of just doing it. Does
So
that make sense?
it's that stair step of unconscious incompetence and conscious
Competence.
yeah. So how long are you in that phase of when you initially learn some strategies? How long would you say a newbie would be in that phase? Is it a couple of days, a week? Is like a month? What is like the max if you see your
It all
students?
depends on how much or how often they are using the strategy. It's not like, okay, you took a 4 hour course or 5 hour course and now you expect it just to happen. It doesn't just happen. You have to exercise it like regularly.
So pretty
And
much
so like
read every day.
to do something every day. I mean, most of the time I tell people you don't need to set aside time to practice these strategies. You read every day. You read your emails. You probably read some web pages. You might read some news, you might read a physical newspaper or magazine. You have opportunities at your fingertips every day. It's just a matter of saying, oh yeah, I do want to use these new strategies on what I'm reading. And so it's about using it. But you also said that you had studied law. So there are a lot of people that end up in my courses that are what I call left brain technically trained, like an accountant or an engineer or a lawyer, where detail is really important. And they come to me, they come to my programs because they say, I want to learn to read faster because I have so much to read. Yet they are so reticent or unwilling to temporarily let go of comprehension. So they learn the strategies, they exercise them, but their comprehension never changes. Never, because they're so afraid of letting it go. And even in my course, I explain how it does have to happen. You have to play with it. There are no grades here. It's not like someone's evaluating you. It's like, have fun with it. Speed through something, laugh at yourself and go, oh, that was so, I don't have no idea what that was. I got to go back. I have no clue, And so you just kind of say, let me readjust my stick shift so that I'm going to get what I need from this material.
Maybe a bit of a simple question, but how do you recommend, the lawyers and the engineers to let go of that comprehension? Because obviously they've been taught their whole life to read a certain way. So it's not like a button that they press and now they've let go. So how do you recommend those people to let go?
The only thing I can tell them is that when they're learning, they're not reading law or engineering or very technical material. I don't recommend that people, even if they are financially minded, that they read the Economist magazine, as their practice material. You want to find material that is pretty familiar, that you have a sight vocabulary that's not really technical for you, like a newspaper or, a sports magazine or something like that, just to get the eyes and brain used to what it's like and to not worry about the comprehension. And then you can transfer that feeling and that experience to more technical material, more detailed. But because you've studied law and I haven't, if you and I both sat down to read something legal, chances are you're going to understand it better and maybe even read it faster than me because you have something called background knowledge. I don't. And so the background knowledge is incredibly valuable for people who are in certain careers to be able to understand and give themselves the value that they know how to understand what they are doing because they've been trained to do that.
How can people test themselves on their speed? So is it just going on Google and then there are these tests? And I think we missed that question. What is the average again of somebody who reads? How many words per minute do they read? What's
Mm-hmm.
slow? What's fast?
Yeah, so I was getting there and I kind of got sidetracked. Sorry. So speaking is around 100 to 150 words per minute. The average reader, at least through the testing that I've done, and it's been corroborated by other speed reading specialists, is just around 250 words per minute. And so then there are more advanced beginner readers, people who haven't had training, that are around 350 words per minute. But the average person reads around 250 words per minute.
And how much does a speed reader read? What is classified as a speed reader then?
So I want to clarify what my definition of speed reading is and what other people may think of it as. So first of all, my definition is that it's a set of active, mindful, and conscious strategies that allow you to get what you need quickly from any reading material in an efficient and an effective manner. That's my definition. People have seen in the past, at least speed reading hasn't been as widely known because of Evelyn Wood, who was the beginning of the speed reading, and we can talk about her and that development. But for the most part, there are people who I know, college kids in the 20s, they never heard of the concept of speed reading before. And so when someone is learning about like what to do when they speed read, they think it's like, take their finger, go down one page really quickly, and then go to the next page really quickly, and then they turn the page and they go down that page pretty quickly, and then they go down the next page pretty quickly, and they think that that's what you should be able to do. And it is possible by people on the upper end of a bell curve, but it's not for the majority of the population. And so like the person who is in the Guinness Book of World Records for speed reading, Howard Berg, he lives in Texas in the US. He was clocked at 25,000 words a minute. Now remember, I said the average rate is 250. It's really almost inhuman to think that you could teach someone how to do that, or even to go thousands of words per minute.
But
For the
wait, so
average human being, it's not.
25,000 words,
25,000, you heard me right.
and he under he read the book as if I was reading the book.
I'm not exactly sure the how they did it, but I know he did get in the Guinness Book of World Records at that speed. I assumed that there was some comprehension testing, although I didn't look into it.
That's
That's
great.
crazy.
So how
Isn't that
what are
crazy?
the techniques or strategy like that's what does this guy do to do 25,000 words?
So I don't really know Howard Berg well. I did take one of his courses when I was developing my own material just because I was so curious, like what does this guy do? And I honestly think he has some sort of I'll call it an other ability. It's not a disability, but it could be that he has some autistic or Asperger's type thing, or he has photo reading ability, something that is not the average human
What is photo
person.
reading?
Photo reading it's another speed reading concept that again I studied or looked at when I was developing my materials just to see what is this, and it's again somewhat, in my opinion, fantastical. Although some people do follow them, and you're welcome to look them up. Photo reading, and it's kind of like pretending as if there's a microphone, not a microphone, a video camera, like on the top of your head, and you like sit back and you like visualize like the whole page, and like you suck it all in all at once. And I tried it for a little while, and then I was like, I like my way better, so I didn't continue doing it. But it's like being able to like digest massive amount of information. Now, I want to get back to your question because I want to answer it. In my opinion, with what someone can do, is that they can exercise what they have built in, which is like their own stick shift. So I know for those who are watching the video, if like I have a hand up, 5 fingers, right? So the thumb and the first finger are gears. These are all gears, and so the thumb and first finger are gears 1 and 2, which are slower gears, and gear 3, 4, and 5 are the faster gears. Most people are stuck in gears 1 and 2 because they never learned how to get into those higher gears. So what I teach people is how you can create a stick shift where maybe you will read at 200 words per minute when you were reading a very important legal document that, you're signing because you're getting a mortgage or something like that, versus maybe you can go up to 1500 or 2000 when you're skimming something or just looking for something more general, when it doesn't matter what you're doing, but you're just trying to get the gist of something. And then how to create the gear shift based on what you're reading, why you're reading it, what you need it for, how much you already know. It's a very conscious, active, mindful, conscious process. But once you get it, it's like you can be pretty efficient.
So what are some of the strategies or tactics that, well, on the one side you teach, but I think also part of my question is that you've seen taught as you were developing your program? Because obviously you just mentioned a woman who started it all. You mentioned the Howard person.
Howard Berg, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I'm super interested to know what you saw as you were exploring, or what you were learning, as well as what you are now teaching that fits you the most.
You ask great questions, Lova. Thank you. So I would say that so in 1988, when I started my journey of my own company, so I worked for REDAC for 1986 to 1988. And then in 88, I started my own company. And I wanted to do some of my own research to figure out what would work for the adult population. Remember, I was working with kids, grades 5 through 12. And I even did pitch to REDAC. I said, hey, I don't really want to travel anymore. I had traveled with them for 2.5 years. But I really think there's a need for this adult business, REDAC for adults. And here's my proposal. I think it was going to cost them like $10,000 for the year to help support my mission to create it. And they turned me down. And I was like, now what do I do? And so that was kind of the beginning of my like, well, if they're not going to do it, maybe I should do it. And so I did. And here I still am. And so I did. I created, the company back then was called The Reading Edge. I called it The Reading Edge. And I started doing public workshops. And as I was doing these public workshops and designing my materials, which, by the way, I just have to share, this was not the digital age yet. Computers were just coming in. You didn't have word processor, ability. I was doing my handouts. I would cut and paste graphics, and I would cut and paste page numbers to put them in the bottom of each of the pages to make a master copy. Wait, and then bring it to the copy.
Just for the listeners, you were cut and paste as in manually cutting with scissors,
yes, scissors
and pasting with glue. Okay, because cut and paste in 21st century means different.
Right. Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. But that's how long ago it started, and so I wanted to find out more from other people that had done reading and speed reading. So I started I went to the library and I got books and I started reading about what other people believed. Evelyn Wood was the original person here in the United States. In 1955, she started her own courses, and she had franchise offices, physical spaces all around the country. She offered free workshops. I remember taking one when I was in high school. It was like 3 hours for free. And then you would sign up for 15 hours, cost at that time was like $595. It was a lot of money. And I never did her course, but then as time went on, they had videos of her, and then she wrote a book. And so I learned a lot from her concept, but I'm not Evelyn Wood, and I'm like her distant cousin at this point.
But so what is her concept? Can you explain?
Her concept is basically there's one set of ways to do it, and it's like going really quickly down the page, see how fast you can go. And yes, you can learn some of it and you can surprise yourself at how much you pick up, but it's not tenable for most people's educational needs. That's basically what I feel. And that her way had a lot of merit, but I think it's really about giving people choices about what works, because not there's no one best way for someone to read. I think there's so many like I teach keywords, I teach phrases, I teach key phrases. We use hand methods. There's no one best way, and to force someone into doing it that way doesn't always work.
And so her method was with the hands, you'd go through the page up to down and just read as fast as
It was
you
more
can.
like this. It was taking your fingers. Okay, so people who are listening, so basically you take all four fingers and in a cupped hand, almost like a claw, and you just kind of go across the lines, under the lines, quickly, left to right, left to right, left to right, left to right. And as you were doing that, it was almost like revealing all the words, and you would just like constantly be like almost like erasing down the page. And so it was like a zip back and forth. And it's a very advanced method that I do teach to some people who have already adapted some of the things that I teach. But it's not the first method, I believe, that someone should be learning when they learn how to read more efficiently. Again, it's not just about speed, it's about being able to understand. If you don't understand what you're reading, that's called speed looking. It's not called speed reading. So you have to be able to have understanding along with what you're seeing.
Okay, so that was Evelyn's tactic then,
Mm-hmm.
strategy. So then, what else were you exploring and finding?
So I was looking at all different books. There's books from different authors. There was even a book from like 1943. I think I have it still in my office downstairs. And it was just talking about how there was such an information overload. This is like in the 40s. I was like, information overload. Like they still were making newspapers like one word at a time on an ink press. And I'm like, there's not that much information, folks. Compared to what we have now, it's a completely different world. But the concepts were similar, though, that people felt overwhelmed with no matter what they had. They felt like they couldn't get through everything. They didn't understand what they were reading. They didn't remember what they were reading. And so from then on, I just would get any books that I could find, and also any courses that I saw, be it public courses, other people that put out material, so that I could understand what it is that other people do. And even to this day, I network with other speed reading companies because I think it's important, number one, that we all, share the wealth and be friends. But it's also important to know, what are we all doing? I think it's important. Some people say, I don't want to know what other people are doing. I'm happy doing what I'm doing. That's your choice. But I have really gained a lot from talking to other colleagues that do similar work to what I do.
It sounds a lot like the tech sector where you have these companies that share a lot, like Tesla, they share a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But by sharing a lot, the technology is going faster up and new innovations are popping up. And so the ones that don't share obviously tend to not last more than 10 years or 20 years. But so what are some of the strategies that you were exploring and finding that stood out to you as like funny or surprising, and ones that just completely surprised you at how effective they were, even though you thought it wouldn't work?
So there are a lot to experiment with. I can say that. In Okay, so the digital age came in sometime. I'm going to say the year 2000, even though like desktop computers came on around 1995, I believe. But we started to get duplication of material from paper to screen. So you could get your newspaper on paper, you could also get it on screen. There were magazines that were also on paper and on screen. So there was this overwhelm, of information. I will say when I first started, so 1988 to 2000, for 12 years or so, I was just dealing with the paper world, which was completely different when we hit to the year 2000. So just know that with the paper world, the concepts were pretty much things like keywords or phrases. But the thing that I found the most important, and this is now, I guess, more in hindsight, was teaching people something that they were uncomfortable with, which is using their hands or a card to keep their place and to track their speed. And so once, people would say, oh, it's really uncomfortable, I'm not used to doing it. Or, well, every time I put my hand on the page, Sister Mary would whack me with a ruler. This is a long time. People would say, no, they said, don't read with your hands. And I'm telling people, read with your hands. Because when you use your hands efficiently and effectively, not pointing at every word, that's not efficient or effective, but when you use it to pull your eyes down the page, you can go into those gears 3, 4, or 5 pretty easily. So I know that if I want to go into higher gears, I have to put my hands or card on a page. It doesn't work. Even though I'm very efficient with my eyes, I pretty much get stuck around 3, 3.5, maybe 4. But I really need to use my hands or card to keep my focus, to keep my place, and also to expedite the process. So those were probably the things that I think people found and still do find to be the most powerful, but also the most uncomfortable because they're not used to it.
I read somewhere that if you use a pencil or something like that, you tend to read faster because it's slimmer than your fingers. Is that correct, or?
Where would the pencil go? What did you read?
Like,
how would you use
it goes on the page, on the word, and then you just pretty much it guides your eyes to read the words. So it goes really fast, and then you just read the words in front of the pencil. And in the book that I read I forgot the name already, but it was something with speed reading. They said stay away from the finger because the finger is not slim enough or something like that, and so you focus better or something if you have a pencil.
I've not seen that one, I'll be honest. Using a pencil to me means that you're going to get pencil marks on the page, which can be very distracting. If you used a pencil that was not sharpened, maybe that's effective, or a pen that's closed, a closed top pen, you could do that. I tell people you can use your hands, you could use a card, you could use a pen.
What do you mean
whatever
a card?
Works.
Like a credit card?
No. So I actually have one here. A blank white card, or the backside of a piece of paper, or the backside of a business card that has nothing on it. Something blank and white.
So you pretty much block the sentence below, all the sentences below the one you're reading.
No. Good try. So this is where when I tell people, okay, I want you to read with a card, where do you want to put it? They basically say what you just said, which is to cover up, where you're going and to just leave open a line at a time of what you're wanting to read. The problem is that you're blocking where you're going. It's like having a wall in front of you. So your eyes keep hitting this wall and you have to keep moving the wall. So that's great for novice readers, for young children, because then they don't get overwhelmed, and they can also, and you or anyone can, go back over what they've read. But we don't want that. We don't want this bad habit called regression to happen unintentionally. And so what I tell people, and this is all through research and the best experience I can say, about 80% of the people I work with love this, that you put the card above the text, and so all the stuff that you want to still read is underneath it, and you go down one line at a time, and you're covering what you've already seen. And so the card goes above the line of text, and then it comes down, and so then you're able to read. It's there. You're not blocked. There's no wall. And you can then go faster and faster and faster as your eyes get more adjusted to reading faster.
And what does the science or the research say? Why does that specific method work better than the other method?
So I won't quote any studies. I can only say from my own experience and what I've been reading, yes, that what it does, think about, there's a lot of words on a page, and depending if it's a narrow column or a wide column of text, right? And so to get your eyes to track accurately across a line and then back to the beginning of that next line accurately, you have to really have some good control. And especially with wider columns, it's like to go from the end to the beginning accurately is not easy. So when you have the card, it makes it really easy, because you're just going one line at a time, and it helps you to gauge the speed that you need for the width of the column as well. And then you're also not tempted to go backwards, because ideally, as you're going faster, you are concentrating more. So that's also something with speed reading, is that as you increase your speed, not crazy speeds, but when you get to your efficient speed, you're focusing more. You have to focus more, because if you're not focusing, then you're daydreaming, and that's not reading. That's, again, looking. It's not reading.
But
And
so
so,
if you
yeah.
focus that long, what does that mean? Does that mean that you can only read, speed read for a certain amount of time? So it's not like reading, let's say, a Harry Potter book or something like that you can read pretty much for 12 hours? Going back to my
You
childhood.
can. You can, I mean, you can speed read for a long period of time. I will say that me personally, that I will kind of go in fits and starts. Well, I'll read for like 20 minutes or a half hour, and then I kind of stop and take a short break, because it also helps to not be continuing to go. We remember beginnings and endings more than we remember middles. And so if I'm reading something for content and understanding and something I'm going to use in the future, sitting down and reading for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours in a straight shot is not very efficient. It's important to stop and take a short break and then come back. So it's like sprints almost. You're doing some sprints instead of a marathon.
I love that you also said that you have that difference between, a society with paper and a society that is digital.
Hmm.
So how is it different now that it's digital? Because I'm assuming I can't hold a card against my screen, or can I? Or
No,
is that
ideally,
how you
no.
do speed reading? I don't know.
No, although, if you have an iPad or a tablet, you could use a card on that, or the concept of a card. I think using a piece of felt works better on those devices instead of a card. But you can adapt the strategy. So in my online course, Rev It Up Reading, I teach people how to read on paper, and then I show them how to adapt it to a screen. And so depending on how they want to test themselves, they can either test themselves on the paper version or the PDF, or they can do it on the screen and using those strategies. And so I've shared. So Pam Mullen, she's a really good friend of mine. She helped me with the chapters in the Complete Idiot's Guide to Speed Reading on the on-screen reading, because she did her master's degree in on-screen reading. And so between she and I and our experiences on speed reading, we came up with these different strategies, more like she did, and she shared them with me, and I teach them in how to adapt it to a screen. So to take the white card method to a screen, you would, let's say, take your text that's there. Let's say you're reading a PDF. You line the first line of text up to like where the ruler would be, up at the top. And then on the side where your scroll bar is, you would just click it and set your mouse, if you can, to one line at a time. So every time you click the sidebar, it will advance one line at a time. And so the line goes up into the dark, almost like a card was coming down. And so you advance it as quickly or as slowly as you feel that you can. So that's one version of the white card method on screen.
But that means you have to click. You cannot scroll.
You can, if your mouse has a scroll button, you can
Yeah.
scroll. Yeah,
Okay.
you can.
No, but for instance, I have a MacBook, and there the scrolling feature is more fluid. So then you won't scroll pretty much always one sentence down. You'll scroll kind of very fluidly.
Oh, yeah, sometimes it's too fast that way.
Yeah. So then you'll have to click just to get that one sentence down every time. Doesn't that
You
get
play with it.
annoying? Doesn't that get annoying if you're reading a really long book and you'll have to click all the time?
Well, there are ways of adapting it, and depending on your device, you may find a way that your finger can do it, that your finger will allow it to go down. It is possible to scroll if you're
With a
using a
touch
mouse,
screen.
touch screen. So it really depends on, and I wrote The Idiot's Guide in 2008. And so things have changed even so much more with all the different devices. And so I honestly haven't kept up completely with all of them, because then I'd have to buy every single one and try every single one. And that just hasn't happened. I trust that people can take my content and adapt it to their device. And if not, they email me and I try to give them advice. So,
How would you speed read? This is super relevant to my industry and sector, especially with startups and investors. How would you speed read on an iPhone? I get tons of messages on WhatsApp or my email, and everybody asks keep it short and simple, and like I expect 3 to 5 sentences, but sometimes even my team tends to send me like these paragraphs that are pretty much novels, and I have to read that. How do you speed read on a small device like an iPhone?
That's a challenge. I'll be honest. I'm not going to say that that is not easy. It is challenging. I think learning how to find the important information quickly will help. And trying to use keywords is probably even better than phrasing will work so that you're able to find the more important words and kind of like skim intentionally down the paragraph as quickly as you can. Like, what are they telling me here? And those keywords will give that to you as quickly as you need. So I'm hoping that people write well, because if they write well, that will make it easier for you. If they don't write well, then you're suffering. So I can't give you anything more than reading keywords. I think would be very helpful.
What is this tactic of reading keywords? Can you explain it a bit more?
Yeah, it's reading, basically finding the more important words in text by size of the word. So, like for example, all right. So I have here. I was quoted at the Wall Street Journal this past week on an article called "Speed Between the Lines," and so I have the article here. I'm just going to read to you one paragraph here. Just let's see. So I'll just read one of the paragraphs in keywords. Okay. Okay. Speed reading, been around decades. President Kennedy famously advocated 1960s when prevailing theories focused reducing eye movement, minimizing subvocalization, saying words head while reading. New tech updates these old world methods, helping users fast track books, documents, articles, emails. So that paragraph, I probably read about 60% of the words that were here. The words I didn't read were has, for, it, in, the, when, the, on, and in your. You get what I'm saying? Is I didn't spend my time, but I got the more important words. Now, here's the question for you. Did you basically get the gist of what I was saying without seeing those other words?
Well, kind of, but it was still confusing. So I'm assuming, how do you establish what keyword is important? Because when you were reading the word when, which is a word you left out, to me that sounds like an important word. How do you know that that one should be left out?
There's no exact science with it. The concept is that you look for words that are generally 3 letters in length or longer and tend to have the most meaning of a sentence. And it's again, it's a mechanical process. So in my classes, I would say to people, or even in my books, I would show people how to underline, to get started mechanically, underline just the keywords and get good at identifying them. And then stop underlining and see if your eyes and brain can find them. And so what if you look at the word when, or you look at the word to, or you look at the word and? It's not a big deal, but as you get better at it, the less that you spend on the words that aren't important, the more efficient you'll be.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so is that tactic of speed reading the keyword strategy? Is that like endurance running where you have to keep it up and you have to, keep exercising, or is it something that once you really get it, it's like riding a bike, where you just, you can always speed read?
So here's an interesting thing. I wish that I could say that once you learn these strategies and you've been using them for a long time, just like I have, that it just comes naturally. So I will say that for me, it is more natural. However, I have to still be mindful, active, and conscious when I sit down to read something. Or, for example, if I get into bed at night and I'm reading something for homeopathy, my other practice, and I'm reading it, I have to think to myself, okay, you have to understand you're not going to read this fast because you're prone, you're laying down. That's not the most efficient way to read. It's you have to consider where you're seated, why am I reading this? What do I need it for? And so I'm reading just general pleasure. Let me get the gist of what this is about. I'm not studying it. But if I was, laying in bed is not the place to be. And so we learn how to be more conscious. Every time I sit down, I'm saying, okay, what do I need from this? And what strategy do I want to use? because otherwise it's just like the same old, let me look at every single word and think they're all important, and I'm just going to plod through it. It's not efficient.
What interests me as well is, are there, I don't know if you've researched this, but are there specific lights that you can use so that your eyes feel more comfortable when you read? I read somewhere that if you use lights that they use in libraries often, which are those tube lights, that they're really bad. And so I don't know if you've researched this. Could you tell me a bit more about that?
So that's something called ergonomics, the ergonomics of reading. And so it's basically how the human body interacts in that environment. So some people need brighter light. They just feel they just need a bright light, and some people don't. What's interesting though is that we have to think about when you read on screen, the light comes from within the computer. So it shines at you. Whereas when you read on paper or a book, you have to have light shine on it. And so, depending on if you're reading, for digital, if you're reading on a screen, you can have very low lighting in your room as long as the screen is able to be seen. You're fine. Whereas you can't have low lighting in a room when you're reading a book or magazine, a physical book or magazine, because the light has to come from outside of it. And so it all depends on the person and their visual ability, how their glasses are. Some people need reading glasses for their paper. Some people need computer glasses for their computers. There are light bulbs that are specifically, soft white bulbs that are better for reading. It's about testing it out and figuring what works best for you. That's the ergonomics of all that.
What kind of soft white bulbs are you talking about? Are these like LED lights or something?
No, they're just here we call them soft white. It's basically they're not like wicked bright, but they're more muted. It's a pretty common name for bulbs here. They're also, some people like colored bulbs. They like to have like an orange or a blue hue in the space, you know.
So it
Some
really
people like to
depends on
have
the
it on.
people.
It depends on the person. But you have to. So here's the mindful, conscious, active part: is if you are reading somewhere and it is either visually or orally distracting, meaning there's a lot of noise, or like you get distracted by you're looking out the window, or there's a kid crying in the background or something, then it's not going to be good for you. But if you're not thinking that that's not good for you, you're just going to do your best to tolerate it. And so you have to start becoming aware of what makes for a successful reading experience for yourself in your environment: light, noise, distractions, comfort, all that.
Yeah. What I'm loving and what I'm hearing is also, it's very much like you need to pretty much create your own little cave of reading, and it's like almost like an athlete that makes the environment as perfect as possible to get as much done as possible. It's pretty much like my office, where everything, every square inch is just made so that I'm productive and I work. And what I'm hearing is pretty much it's the same if you want to read. Are there any tips though that you do that people could maybe try experimenting with?
So one of the things that I have found easily is that when I'm at my work desk, when I do my work, do my emails, read on screen, reading web pages, if I'm reading to learn something, if I bought a nonfiction book, if I want to, upgrade my knowledge on something, sitting at that space is really distracting. I have a really hard time, no matter if I clear off my desk, no matter if my phone's there, my computer's there, the web is there. It's just too like, oh, let me go check this out. Like, no, I need to spend this much time. I want to go through these chapters. So I move to a cleared off kitchen table or a cleared off dining room table. Cleared off meaning there's not stuff all over it. And I sit myself up to it, and I have usually a white card or two. I have a glass of water, and I just perch myself and I just start to use it. And I may have paper and pad next to me because there may be some notes I want, or a highlighter if I'm going to highlight in the material. And so I just kind of, it's a mindful experience. It's always about, what am I doing? And what do I need it for? Why am I reading this? And how am I going to get the most out of it as I possibly can by setting myself up for the most success? And at my desk is not it. So, like I work with people in companies, I tell them, when you're well, granted we're in COVID, but outside of this, when they're in the company and they're trying to get reading done at their desk, it's really difficult. So they need to sometimes sign themselves into a conference room and make time, like 30 minutes or an hour, where it's just uninterrupted, no calls, no emails, turn your phone off, go into the cafeteria off hours, go into the corporate library, just remove yourself from your regular workspace because it's very difficult to get a lot of good reading done.
Oh wow, I did not think about that. Yeah, no, it explains a lot. I one of the questions I wanted to ask, it popped up when we were researching. You've had clients like Yale University as well as the U.S. Army and the U.S. Navy, two completely different ways of teaching. I'm assuming two completely different target groups. What are some of the tactics and strategies you were using with clients like Yale University? Because I'm assuming those were students or?
Sometimes they're students. I've been hired to work with different groups there. A lot of times it was for the Learning Center there. The Learning Center has people who work on staff. And so it's the professional development arm for the staff development at Yale University as well. So, but I've also worked with the students. So it just depends on who the audience is. And usually before I go into any client, I spend some time getting the names of like 5 people who might be in the workshop and just to talk with them briefly. What are your challenges? What are your expectations? And, over the 30 years I've been doing it, I pretty much know what they're going to say. But I'd like to hear from them because I may hear something unique about their industry or their business or the way they proceed that helps me sound more like I know who they are when I do my training. So I want to make sure that I use the terms like, if they talk about their colleague as a colleague and not a fellow employee, or their boss, they don't call it their boss, they call it a team leader, little things like that that just make me sound like I know what I'm doing. I will do that. I will do that. But the content is still pretty much the same. It's more about how they assimilate it. And they bring their own material. I have them bring a couple of samples of their own reading material to the program so that they can play with it just for a few minutes. And we get to look at the structure of each of the pieces of material that they bring. So that's how we kind of can individualize it.
So in this academic environment, what does usually, when you're asking these questions, what do the people usually say? Because you said in these 30 years, by now what pops up. What is like, yeah, what pops out?
Well, the question what are your reading challenges? And sometimes it's like, oh, I just don't like to read, or I read really slowly and I just have so much I have to manage, or I don't understand much of what I'm reading. It's a new job and I need some help with that. Or they're just feeling like they read things and they don't understand them and they could use some help in focusing better so that they can remember what they're reading. A lot of times it's just about the feelings of inadequacy or lack of training of their own skills, and then dealing with an overwhelming amount of material that they feel they have to read.
So how do you fix that?
So I tell people, one of the things I share is how to make a reading pile that's more quality instead of quantity. Because there's tons out there. I mean, the amount of, books in a library are, hundreds of thousands of any, by title alone, or magazines, just like thousands of magazines. I mean, you can't read it all, so don't even try. But what you want is to find a way of self-evaluate, like its importance. So let's say, this came to me, I had been teaching speed reading probably for about 10 years, and I saw my reading pile was starting to get really high. And I'm like, why do I have all this material to read? Like, what's going on? And granted, I had 2 kids at the time and it was like time was less. But it was like, I realized that it was because the amount of time that I was spending didn't match the amount of material that I was saving. And a lot of the material that I was saving really wasn't that important or valuable to me. I was getting certain magazines or different books, and I was like, they just don't excite me. And so once I came up with this strategy, which I assume you'd like me to share,
Yes, please.
Yeah, it's a really quick four-step strategy to get a quality reading pile. And so this is how I came upon it really on my own. That I took every piece of reading material that I owned that I had saved, the stuff that was piled next to my nightstand, in the bathroom, down on the kitchen counter, in my office, and I put it all together. And then I triaged it and I said, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, what's its personal value to me right now? One or zero is absolutely no value. Like I don't know why it's even in here. And 10 is I absolutely love this and I can't wait to have more of it. And so on this trajectory of, let's say, 0 to 10, I think I took a post-it notes and I just wrote a number on each thing, the magazine or the newspaper or the book. And I created two piles. Anything 6 and over was on one side of the table, and anything under 6 was on the other side of the table. So if you can imagine, anything under 6 is really not important, not useful, not self-satisfying. So that got recycled, thrown out. I unsubscribed to that. The stuff that was on the right, then I had to figure out, okay, now what do I do? I have all this still to read. It's stuff I really am and would like to read. How do I do it? And so then it was about adding more reading time if I was going to read everything that was here, or I was going to get rid of stuff on that side because it wasn't going to match the amount of time. So I tell people, if you can take like a 1 to 3 month period of your life and say, how much time do I give to reading? Your reading pile should not exceed what you think you can do, because otherwise then you become overwhelmed. And so you start saying no to reading material that just doesn't, doesn't float you at all. It's not soul satisfying. It's not mentally or emotionally.
So it's pretty much like that Netflix Marie Kondo, is it? Where you're pretty much just, instead of cleaning your apartment, you're cleaning your reading list, or how?
Yes. So you make a pile that's more quality. So then when you're thinking, oh, what am I going to do right now? You're like, oh, I want to read something, because that pile is attracting you instead of, detracting you. It's like a magnet. It's like, oh, I want that. And so you don't put things in that pile that you don't want. And some things you thought you wanted maybe 6 months ago that's in that pile, it's just not important to you anymore. It's past. That thought passed. That cooking course you might want to take. You got all these cooking magazines, and now you're like, no, I don't want that. We're done. You get rid of it.
So, and what are the next steps? Because you said there are 4 steps in this.
So basically, the first step is to gather all the material. The second is to grade it on a scale of 0 to 10, put a number on it. Then the third step is to split it up into 2 piles and to decide what to do with it. And then the last step was to figure out how much time do you have to read versus how much do you have, so that you balance your time with the size of the pile. So that's the fourth step.
Yeah. Okay. What I'm learning and what I really like is pretty much the way you handle speed reading is from a more conscious kind of way. Whereas I know for myself, there are so many books that are just getting piled up, and our library is getting bigger and bigger. I mean, we just got a little puppy, and suddenly like 5 puppy books joined our library, and eventually we only read one that was really good, and we just watched YouTube videos on the others.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of felt guilty not reading the other books, but they're not necessary at this point. They're probably going to be necessary in later stages. So what I can definitely use is already like that classifying scale, and then just park certain books for later without feeling guilty about it. Because I do notice for myself that if I'm feeling guilty about not reading certain books, I look at the pile like I don't want to read it anymore.
That's right.
So
Yeah,
I didn't
it's
even
not
think about
attracting.
that. Yeah, I didn't even think about that. So that is like from an academic point of view. When you then look at, for instance, clients like the U.S. Army or the U.S. Navy, how I can imagine that that's maybe more of an operational type of reading that they need to do instead of an academic, which I can imagine kind of feels like when you're going from college, school, or university into real life, into a job. Um, is that the case when you go into the military, or is it
So
What
for
kind of
them,
pops up
it's
there?
it's really very different depending on their job. You know, if they're civilian or military. So I have both in the classes. My most recent was the Air Force. I worked for the Air Force a couple summers, and it's interesting that people bring. When I say bring your own reading materials, there are people in that room who are going back to school, so they bring their school materials. Some people bring like their Bible because that's part of their reading material, and then some people will bring their procedural manual. You know, some people bring a time management book. So it's just so many different things that they have to read, not just for work, but for their own personal development. And that's also important to them to be able to read, you know, through that. So I wanted to give you one other tip. This is very helpful. I think you'll like this one. That if you look at every nonfiction book that you have in your stash and your on your piles, that the best thing to know about those books, and as a nonfiction author of 3 books myself, that every single book I wrote and every nonfiction author starts with an outline. And so you find this outline in the table of contents. So let's say you're reading chapter 3 of something. You need to understand that that chapter started from an outline, and what you're reading now is a fleshed out outline. It's everything that has now been filled in. And so then your job as an efficient reader is to find the writer's outline. Because once you get that, you're going to get like good 50% of the main information, or 60%, and then what's left is detail and an extra material that supports the main ideas, but you may not need all that material. And so where that outline is located is simply in the first sentences of paragraphs. If you read your introductory paragraph, it tells you where the chapter is going. You read the first sentence of each paragraph, you may see a subheading, you may see bullet points, anything that like pops out, you would read that, and then the summary paragraph of the chapter. And you can quickly, you know, get through a lot of material, and actually with better understanding for the most part, without all the detail, than someone who read the whole thing. So I'm not saying that you skip over things regularly, but you intentionally decide which paragraphs do you need and you want to spend time on, and which ones like, okay, I got it, let me go to the next, without spending all the time that it needs to read every single paragraph. And once you realize that, it becomes more, it's so much more pleasurable because you weed out, WEED, you weed out the stuff that's just superfluous and extra that you might not need.
That sounds like a really great tactic if you are reading nonfiction books like
Mm-hmm.
operations stuff, obviously dog books or a lot of business books. But for
Mm-hmm.
instance, when you're reading, let's say, an autobiography, there are great autobiographies from, you know, Elon Musk and Steve Jobs and all these. I know Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney, had
Mm-hmm.
a great. I can recommend that one. But so reading with that tactic, would that apply also to autobiographies? Because it seems like you'd enjoy the book less, no?
So, an autobiography, from my understanding, is someone talking about their own life, so there's story involved. You may find that you're going to want to read more of it because there's more story involved, but you probably could get, I mean, a paragraph is meant to have an idea in it. And so each paragraph should be focusing on something. And if you find when you read the first sentence of the paragraph that it's that thing that you don't need to spend time on, then maybe go to the next paragraph. You can always go back. I mean, it's not, there's nothing hard and fast that says you can't go back. But you want to do it, you know, again, active mindfully and consciously, like, okay, do I want this? Do I not want this? Or maybe the autobiography is what you read in detail and you want to chew it, you want to savor it, you want to just enjoy it and daydream on it. You know, it's all your choice on what you do with all the material that you have.
So it's like a tool in your tool belt, which you can use or not use.
Right.
Yeah, I like that. I feel like in an autobiography, I'd be using the keyword strategy more instead of that other one. But would when I would be rereading the autobiography, I could use this paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
reading. I know that when I was in law school, they would recommend for us to rip out the outline and study with the outline next to it.
Mm-hmm.
And now I understand why, obviously.
I'm so
Yeah.
glad.
They
Yes,
didn't
it
explain it. They
corroborates.
just like put the outline next to it. I was like, sure, I'll do it.
Yes.
It's a miracle I got through it. But
Good for you.
no, that sounds any like more yeah, interesting strategies that you could recommend for especially maybe more practical founders who are dealing with, you know, some issues within their company. I was always recommended as a founder myself that whenever I have an issue in my business, you know, find a book that deals with that issue and then read it as fast as possible to fix it. I've noticed with HR, as we were scaling and doubling our teams, you know, these issues really would pop up overnight and I would need to find a solution over the weekend. So I can
Mm.
imagine, you know, founders having this pressure and they have this weekend to figure it out. So what strategies would you recommend to use when you're under that much pressure? You have only a weekend to figure out, and there are a couple of books that you need to read to fix certain. Which strategy or combined strategies would be the best for that situation?
Well, I'm hoping that you come up with the best books because there are books that are written, believe it or not, that are not as useful as others. So, hoping that you came upon the more recommended, the ones that have good reviews, you know, from reputable sources, so that the time that you spend is going to be valuable. Which, by the way, when I read fiction, which I don't read a lot of, but when I do, I go to my friends and I say, "So what have you read lately that's good?" And then you know, when I hear enough of that same book, I'll go get it and I'll take it on vacation with me when I go. It's like I won't just like pick a book off the shelf. I will typically get a recommendation from someone because I don't like to waste my time. That's just me. But when it comes down to business material, I would, once you hopefully intelligently selected the books, that you look for the writer's outline and say, is this going to cover, is this going to give me what I need based on either if there is an outline, hopefully there is an outline, or just the titles of the chapters. Are they going to, do they seem pointed? Are they going to be useful? And then just read like just the introductory paragraph and then stop reading everything and just really do your best to kind of take, I call it the 10,000 foot view, where it's almost like you're up in a helicopter now looking around on this thing instead of walking through it. And let's look and see what all is here. And you read first sentences of paragraphs and you say, okay, is this going where I want it to? If it is, great. If it's not, then go find another chapter, go find another book. It's kind of, that's how I would do it, to be really, really efficient with that.
So then those are kind of also the strategies that you teach. So the outline with the paragraphs, the white card method, the
Mm.
finger. Well, if you have the white card, then you don't need the fingers, right? Quick question. Is it allowed to be a colored card or a black card, or does it have to be white because the paper is white?
As long as there's no words on it, and it, for me, I guess I've been trained with blank white. So using just the backside of a printer paper works. You know, you could fold it up into whatever size column that you're in. You don't have to buy cards. You could use anything. Sometimes I've used the magazine subscription uh, pull out. You know, here's the magazine, and I'll use that. But the words sometimes are a little distracting. In my book 10 Days to Faster Reading that I use in my online course, and also by the way, I have it as an audiobook. People who don't like to read have said to me, I want to learn how to read better, but I don't want to read doing it, so I created an audiobook. And so there's 10 different, each day shows 10 different possible ways. So the white card is the one that 80% of the people use right off the bat because it makes a lot of sense, and that's why I shared it with you here. But there are at least 9 to 12 other possible variations that can be used. So don't be locked in to just the white card method.
So then you have the white card method, the first paragraph with the outline, you have the ergonomics of the room. So I think that's definitely one I'll be taking for myself. So instead of reading in the office, finding a space which we have in the office, we have a small meditation room. Maybe
Mm.
if we put a chair there, we could just have it as a reading room as well,
Mm.
and or booking a conference room and then just focusing on the reading. Um, so when you take that into a laptop, an iPad, that would apply. When you take that into a laptop or an iPhone, are there maybe apps that you use or things that you can, well, that you use to read emails faster?
Emails are tough because don't go through a publishing process and editing process that books and magazines and newspapers and things do. So it's harder to find first sentences of paragraphs. People aren't that good a writer typically. So emails are a little bit different. I do my best to not read long periods of time on my phone, except when I've been in an airport and I have nothing else, I don't want to take out my laptop. I'd rather just be on my phone. I'll do that. That's fine. I think reading in general on any device probably just needs to have, again, the right lighting and the intentionality of like, what am I doing here? There are a couple of free speed reading apps. Spritzinc.com is one. Another one is Spreeder.com that was put out by a company called Seven Speed Reading. And so another one called Zap Reader. I haven't checked exactly online now if they're still free or not, but there are apps on the phone. You can just like look in your app store and look for speed reading apps. A lot of them are free. I think there's a Spreeder one. And basically what you do is you save a document or a book or something into that, and you can have it set to be delivered to you like one word at a time, 2 words at a time, 3 words at a time. And you can have it go at 300 words a minute, 500 words a minute, 700 words, and you can change it. And so it's great practice for the eyes and the brain to pick up information quickly. I'm not sure if you want to read a whole book that way. I think you might start to go crazy, but it's good for training. So you could use some of your reading time as training time when you use one of these apps.
What is a good training amount? So is 10 minutes a day, will that get you far, or do you have to do half an hour a day? Um, Very
It is
practical question.
so individual. There are some people who I have trained, and I love that they've done this, where they have become so regimented. They will read for 20 minutes a day. They keep a log. They test themselves at the beginning. They test themselves at the end. They use the strategies, and they will say, after a month or so of doing it, that they really are seeing the difference and it's feeling more comfortable and blah blah. And other people, after my courses, I just say, look, take the next 10 days and every day try reading. There's one exercise that I share called Discipline Your Eyes. It's available on my website for free. It's also in my online course. That if you printed it out and or had it on your screen and did that every day, it takes about a minute or less. That's just a great reminder of how you want your eyes and brain to move. And so if you do something for 10 days that where you've assimilated some of the material that I'm sharing, you're going to find that you will definitely have the tools, provided you remember to use them, to apply to all your reading.
So wait, what is this discipline your eyes exercise? How does that work?
Discipline your eyes. Yeah, it's an exercise. Okay. I hope I'm allowed to do this. On my website, I give away a free 1-day access to my course at revitupreading.com, and that free access gives you module 4 that demonstrates this exercise. It's a very programmed exercise where basically there are phrases, and so it says the purpose of this drill is to move the little muscles in the eyes from left to right. I think that's how it starts. And so once you learn how to do it and the way that it's set up, it shows you what you're supposed to do. You feel what it's supposed to do, and you can time yourself. Like the first time you do it may take you a minute. The next time you do it might take 50 seconds. Next time might be 48 seconds. And as you get good at it and better at it, then it makes you understand how to translate that feeling onto your own material. So it's just a piece,
So
but
it's
it's
like
a
a
really important
muscle
piece.
trainer for your eyes almost.
Correct. Yes.
And so you said left to right. Maybe again a simple question, but does that mean that people that are in countries like, I know, Arabic and Hebrew, they go from right to
To
left?
left.
is that then a problem for those people, or how does that work?
Well, the concept remains that it's still how to be efficient going from one side to the other. Because the course was developed in English and only in English at this point, that's why it says it shows the little muscles going from left to right, at least reading in English. My book has been translated into Chinese and Russian. I
That's
have no
also
idea
super
how good that.
interesting. Chinese, that's
Yeah,
symbols.
yeah.
So how does that work with speed reading? Is that
I
easier or harder? Good. Okay.
I have no idea. I really don't, but I do know that it sells in China, and I do have people that come to me from China that have read the book and want to take my online course. And
Really?
I obviously, not obviously, I don't read Chinese and I don't read Russian. The only thing I can recognize on either one of those covers is the number 10, because 10 days to fast to read. The rest of it, no, I don't get it. So I don't know how it works, but they wanted the rights, and so they got sold the rights.
That's crazy. It's
Isn't it?
amazing work that you did. I wanna first, for a second, I also want to jump into the career that you had because it's been almost everything speed reading, but you've kind of created this entrepreneurship path for yourself, literally transforming from, what you said, a paper society to a digital society, writing these books. How did you become this person that became kind of the expert around speed reading? Was it like just luck or accidents? How did you get these book deals? How did you get books translated into Chinese? Yeah, can you explain a bit more about the background and how these opportunities came to you?
So I think it's persistence is the word. Obviously, for being in business 30 something years, I've found ways to pivot and move depending on what happens in the world. I think the books themselves, I never, ever in my ever thought I would write a book. I mean, I never really like writing. I still don't like writing. I like to have written. I love being a published author. I don't love the whole process of it. Um, but my first book was actually, it was offered to me in 1991 when someone from Southwestern Publishing called me and said, "Hey, it looks like you're doing a study skills program over at Manchester Community College. You must be an expert. Would you like to write a book?" And I remember looking at the phone going, "You're kidding, right?" And then I almost hung up on her, but I didn't. And then we had this conversation. I met with her, and bottom line, I ended up with this college level textbook that went to 3 editions as a result. So I started my writing career there. Then the 10 Days to Faster Reading, again, I thought at some point I would write a book on it, but I had a 2.5-year-old at home and a 5-year-old. I was like, there's no way I'm writing a book. But I was asked, by an agent, would you like to write this book on speed reading? I'm like, okay. So I did. I got up at 5 in the morning and wrote from 5 to 7 before the kids and family were up. And that's how I got that one done. And then the next one, The Idiot's Guide, another colleague of mine, I've been a member of the National Speakers Association. I was, I'm not at the moment, but for 24, 25 years. And one of my colleagues said, "Hey, we're looking for an author for this Complete Idiot's Guide to Speed Reading. Would you like to do it?" So again, I've never to this day had to put in a proposal. It wasn't like, I really want to write this book. None of that. It's just dropped into my lap. And I feel very blessed about that. So.
During these periods, you were obviously giving a ton of workshops, I can assume speaking at a lot of places. That's
Hmm.
probably how those opportunities came to you, right?
I assume so. I became known for doing speed reading. Yes, I was going around, I'll call it the association circuit, and where they had conferences, and I would do, conference workshop breakouts, survival reading skills for the busy professional, I think I called it at the time. And then when I created the online course in 2008 or 9, that also started to spread the word more too, because people could find me. They would search for, speed reading course, speed reading book, whatever, and they were able to find me that way. So the course itself has been very helpful, and more people have learned that way than just, an in-person workshop now.
What do you prefer? Do you prefer online courses or do you prefer in-person teaching?
Well, at this point in my career, I am definitely more on the online because I have, and as I mentioned to you, I have another career. And so for me to have the online, I can still be a speed reading expert. I can still help people learn these strategies while I can also do other things that I'm passionate about. And so it works better for me. Although I have taken my material, I've created it for a Zoom platform. I did a 4 hour work. I do my 4 hour workshop on Zoom. It worked really well, really, really well. And I, would do that again in a heartbeat if the opportunity came. But I don't market that much anymore. I really am very happy with the content in my books, my audiobook, my podcast, and also the online course. So it's like I feel like I've massaged that material as much as I'm ever going to at this point in time. That's where I'm at.
What kind of well, you mentioned podcasts. What kind of podcasts do you have?
So that was one of the things that I was doing a while ago. It's a podcast that has 18 different episodes. They're only about 10 minutes long, 10, 12 minutes, and they're just basically one aspect of the speed reading world. I did stop at the 18th episode, but they're still up and they're still available for people for free. And I think it gives people at least a good solid introduction to what it is that I'm talking about, and they can learn a lot just from those 18 episodes. So I did have other ambitions for that podcast, but again, it just I decided not to continue at this point.
Um, Maybe a good transition because you mentioned it, but let's cover. Obviously, you had this entire other career where you went pretty well national with it as well.
Mm.
Can you cover the moment you wanted to transition into a more health-oriented career and how that transition went, and obviously the journey and what you explored there?
I appreciate your asking about that because it is important to me, this other part. So what really happened was in 9/11, when 9/11 happened in 2001, it was devastating for everybody, for many different reasons, especially people who travel and speak for a living and do training because everything stopped, completely stopped. And it stopped for, conferences got canceled, meetings got canceled. And so for a good, I'm going to say it ended up being about a year and a half or two before things started to come back. And my husband had said to me, he said, if it doesn't come back, what would you do? And it gave me a moment to pause. And long time ago, I thought, oh, I want to drive a Greyhound bus. That's a public bus that travels around the country. And I said, oh, would I do that? I'm like, no, I got a family, I got a husband. No, I'm not going to do that anymore. And, what else would I do? And I think my husband was hoping I was going to say, I was going to get a job in a university where I would get benefits. And I had been doing adjunct teaching at a community college at the time, but it just didn't really excite me. But what did excite me was to learn more about homeopathic medicine. My son, when he was 9 months old, had repeated ear infections and had tons of antibiotics. They were going to put tubes in his ears. And when I said, I want to learn more about what else is out there before we go for that surgery. And, push came to shove, I ended up at some natural methods, and one of them was a homeopath on actually the recommendation of my own mother, who got to natural medicine late in life. And I went to a homeopath. He was about 18 months old, not that verbal. You couldn't say, so tell me what it feels like. But after this interview, it was about 90 minutes long with him, and he observed my son, and I gave him information, gave him a couple of these sweet tasting pellets with some medicine on them, and his ear infection went away and never returned. And it was
Really?
one of those, like, yeah, really, like wow, how could that was really like
What did he give
unusual.
him?
He gave him, I've come to find out, it's a remedy called chamomilla. It's made from chamomile tea. It's the energy of chamomile. And basically, my son, when he had it's for repeated ear infections in infants, and the keynote of it, and I know this because I'm a homeopath now, is when they are, very upset, they're screaming, they're very clingy, but you give them what they're asking for, and then they push it away. And so it's one of those things that you go, that could be chamomilla. So there's different remedies. There are like 3,000 plus remedies, but for him, that remedy worked really well. And I was like, it was interesting enough, but I was like, that's cool. Then he got sick again with something else. We went back. He got some more of these little white pellets of a different kind for his different symptoms. He got better. And I'm like, this is cool. So by the year 2000, 2001, I started learning a little more. I went to a conference through the National Center for Homeopathy. And I was like, homeopathy for beginners. And I was just so raptured by the whole concept. And it's so unique and so different. And by 2003, I enrolled in a school, a weekend school. So it was part time for me to learn it. And so from 2003 to 2013, I studied it part time. I became nationally certified. So I have a national certification here in the States. And I practice part time because I do rev it up reading part time and I do homeopathy part time. And
When
without
you
my
say
reading
you
skills, I wouldn't
when
be
you say
doing it.
you practice it, is it like in the Netherlands where the insurance pays back some of the? How does that work?
It doesn't here. It's out of pocket. It's completely out of pocket. And it's where I conduct interviews with people. Usually 2 hours is the first interview, and then we have follow-up sessions that are about an hour. Insurance does not cover anything like that at this point. And because I'm certified, there's no licensure for homeopathy unless you are a medical doctor as well, which I'm not. But there are more people like me in the states. There's like over 1,100, I think, professional homeopaths and only about 100 medical homeopaths in this country. So there are more people that are certified, but they won't recognize it. There's no money in it. I mean, homeopathy is so inexpensive and it does work very well. I found the results are amazing how people's lives can change through this very natural medicine that doesn't kill anybody, doesn't get processed through the liver, that has a track record, of over 200 years. There is scientific evidence that people say there isn't. There is scientific evidence that it works. So it's very cool. And it requires a ton of reading. Ton. There's no way I would be a homeopath unless I had these reading skills that I developed a long
Do you
time ago.
know the term biohacking?
I've heard of it. What are you referring to?
So in Silicon Valley, there were a couple of hackers that started to hack their body, real hackers, cybersecurity type of things that started to think, well, I'm engineering these things and doing these computer things. Maybe I can do that with my body. And so these biohackers would then, look at supplements or certain things that they could eat or do to get the most out of their body. A lot of this, we actually had on our podcast, Aubrey de Grey, who talks about, longevity and anti-aging and stuff like that. So you have, diverse biohackers. You have ones that are trying to cure diseases. You have ones that are trying to prolong their lives. So it's very different. But it sounds to me like it kind of falls into this homeopathy type of industry.
So yeah, I mean homeopathy is well known like in India and in Europe. Like over 200 million people use it, and they use it as their main form of healthcare. It's not necessarily complementary, but I think it's a great complement to pharmaceutical medicine and other alternative medicines, naturopathy, and so I think there's a big toolbox of health out there, and that pharmaceutical medicine is only one. And I think homeopathy has a great adjunct to it. So I do a study group. I teach parents and other interested people how to use a homeopathic kit at home. There's like 50 different remedies that a person would buy for all different things like bites and burns and bumps and bruises and stomach upsets and scrapes and things that normally you may need to go to the doctor for, or like a client recently just had a tooth pulled and it got infected and they didn't want to take an antibiotic. And I said, there's nothing wrong with antibiotics, but here, let's try this remedy first. If within 24 hours it doesn't seem to make it better, then you have to decide what to do. And he was better. Within 24 hours, he didn't need the antibiotic with a homeopathic remedy. And so
Well,
there are certain
what did he
things.
take? What did you give him?
There are different, so understand that it's not like, oh, I have a headache, you're going to take a Tylenol or an ibuprofen or an aspirin, because it's not a one size fits all. With homeopathy, it's very individualized. In this person's case, because it was a tooth pull and because there was a lot of pus and a lot of inflammation in that area, There's a remedy specifically for that condition. It's called Hepar Sulf. It's just a remedy for these kinds of pussy infections, and they do usually come from a tooth extraction. So these are just things that we learn over time.
And where are these remedies to be? Can you just Google, like, hey, I have tooth pain. What is the homeopathic remedy for that?
So the cool thing now, which wasn't in a long time ago, is that there is Google, and you can put in homeopathy for tooth infection, homeopathy for headaches, homeopathy for flu, and you will get a lot of different websites, and you will read through these websites, and every website typically has a short list of remedies that are recommended with a short description. And the idea is to say which one of these descriptions on these different websites of this remedy seem to resonate with who I am and what's going on with me right now. Like, I am craving cold drinks, but whenever I drink, I get sick. I vomit or something. And so, or I have diarrhea along with my vomiting. And so, pardon, not to be totally gross.
No,
This
this
my
is like
world.
interesting. You can go like one of my charities actually deals. So Why Not Three is one of my charities. It actually created startup funding events because we believe in three pillars: health, wealth, and relationships, and we kind of fix on those. We started that 5 years ago, and one of the things that we deal with all the time in the beginning, we started it for health purposes, was we would get these clients who, doctors could just not save, like nothing. And so we would be looking at technology, new innovations. That charity got certified by the Alcat Center laboratories. So these are blood test analysis laboratories they're globally, and they have offices in Germany, in the US, and in Asia. I think in Thailand, if I remember correctly. But so through them, we would be invited to conferences that Harvard would organize with all these doctors and research being discussed. And one of the things that kept popping up is these clients would come. It's a charity. And so we tried to help them by referring them to experts on, for instance, when gluten wasn't really like a thing yet. There was a doctor at Harvard, I think, that started researching gluten sensitivities and published a paper in 2014. So we're talking now 6 years ago. And it was just published back then. And so it was, I think, one of the first papers that described gluten sensitivity as an actual thing that people react to, instead of obviously celiac disease, which is gluten intolerance. And so we get these clients that just doctors for 20 years were researching and blood testing and couldn't fix at all. And then we'd refer them to, people who are like fixing people like you. And I'd find these people through my journeys because I had health issues in the past as well. And like in Germany, I'd find people in Ireland and in Silicon Valley, a lot of them as well. Who are into anti-aging, longevity, fixing weird diseases with pretty much normal type of stuff, not, medicine. And so this is genuinely super interesting for me, and especially in the startup world where stress, pretty much makes you sick after a while because you have that constant stress. You can talk very freely about the vomiting and everything.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I forgot what I was talking about.
You were talking about, well, I guess maybe a question that is more interesting for me. One of the things that constantly pops up, especially if you have a business or even if you're just a manager in a big company, is migraines. So I can imagine a lot of people come to you for migraines. I know, it's a thing. I've never had migraines in my life. Lately, sometimes I tend to deal with it. So I can imagine there are some remedies that some entrepreneurs can try. What are your thoughts?
So you call them entrepreneurs, I just call them human beings with symptoms. That's pretty much what it is. And so what I find with migraine, I do get a lot of people with migraines because they're debilitating. And for some people, it's like every week or it's every couple days, or women get them sometimes just, once a month around their cycle. And sometimes it's stress related. But the key for me as a homeopath is to find out well, first, what are all the physical symptoms? What makes it better? What makes it worse? Where is the headache? Is it on the forehead? Is it on the top? Is it on the back? What does it feel like? What side is it on? When does it start? Does it start first thing in the morning? Does it come on at 3 in the afternoon? If you take a nap, does it make it better? I mean, all these unique details. Like I have a woman in my practice, when she gets a migraine, you'd think that the classic picture is you lay down in a dark room, you don't want to have any sound, no noise. She wants to go for a run.
Really?
Yes, that's her unique way of dealing with her migraine. So I couldn't give that remedy to somebody that needs to lay down in a dark room because their modalities are different. And then there's also sometimes it's about what caused them. So I sometimes get, and this is frequent, I hate to say, people who have migraines, and I say, since 2013 I've had migraines. So tell me, what was going on in 2013? They would think, and then, well, my mother died, or my best friend had a really bad accident, or I was raped, or there was something that was very emotionally jarring. And what happens with migraines, at least we see this homeopathically, is that the body will speak the mind. It's like the mind is freaking out. It's not happy about what has just happened. And yeah, they may cry and yeah, they will mourn to a certain extent. But on the other side, they haven't been able to process all of that. And so their body will just say, oh, I'm going to hurt. I'm going to make it really hurt because I am hurting. And it could show up as a migraine. It could show up as irritable bowel syndrome. It could show up as arthritis. And so, since the body does speak the mind, we kind of figure out what is it that the body needs to speak. And then we look at how it speaks through all the symptoms. And then we match it to a good homeopathic remedy and see what the body does with it.
So in that case, what is the homeopathic remedy? Because to me that sounds like the person needs to go to a therapist to talk or something.
Sometimes we do encourage, talk therapy as well. An adjunct of having talk therapy along with homeopathy is good. Like the woman who runs, I'll give you that one. It's a clear-cut picture because number one, it's a woman. Number two, she typically gets the migraines right before her period, and she wants to exercise or run when she has it. There's a remedy, very popular women's remedy called sepia. Sepia is made from a cuttlefish, and sepia is a very popular, common women's remedy in the homeopathic world. And so sepia is a really good one for this specific client for those specific reasons.
Maybe one I definitely need to ask because it happens. I'm a man, so I don't really understand it as much, but I know that women within certain months gets worse, or some months are better, but sometimes the period comes and it really hurts apparently to a point where the whole day is ruined. So I know that, well, I was talking also with someone who's into natural remedy, and I found out about this tea. Obviously, I don't use it, but but it seemed to help. And obviously, a lot of women also are in my surroundings. So, what are some of the remedies that you think in those situations apply, or is it really again a very individual?
So there's two ways to approach a woman's cramping, and one is more holistically, like what all else is going on in that person. Is it just the cramping that they're dealing with, or do they also have irritable bowel syndrome? Do they also have heart palpitations? Do they also have panic attacks? Because that would be a very different picture.
Yeah, let's keep it
However,
simple, just the
keep it
cramping.
simple. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. And so if you just wanting, this is what we call acute prescribing, ACUTE, acute, meaning it comes on suddenly and it can stay for a short period of time and then it goes away. It could be even like a headache, could be acute, but when you have it for more than like 6 months, it becomes more of a chronic thing. But you can look at the cramping. There's remedies like magnesium phosphoricum, MagPhos is a really good women's cramping remedy. There's another one called colosynthis. It just depends on the modalities that they would have, and that can be purchased over the counter. You can buy it online. Homeopathic pharmacies sell them. And again, you can Google it, homeopathy for menstrual cramps, and you'll be able to see the differentiations. And it could be, if you sweat during them, if you want to curl up in a ball, do you want heat on it? Are you irritable? Are you craving lemonade? I mean, there's so many different
Wow. Okay, I had
things
no
that
idea.
happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very intricate profession. And I mean, I am certified nationally, but I learn every day from my clients, from my studies, in how it interacts with people. It's not like you're done. There's so much more that we have to learn. And reading, by the way, is the best way to do it.
I have to ask this last practical one around these treatments, but of stress, obviously, a big factor. Are there any? That's a very general question, then, of course, considering all the things you just told me. But is there a couple of remedies you'd jump to or recommend if stress pops up, and to deal better with stress?
So part of the homeopathic intake, at least for me, is not just to look for a remedy for somebody, but to look at what are they doing in their lives that is also contributing to their discomfort. And so I have a section even on my intake forms that, what do you do for self-care? Are you getting enough sleep? Are you eating appropriate healthfully? Are you getting enough hydration? Are you drinking enough? Are you getting any exercise? Are you doing any mindful activities? If there's nothing checked off there, even if they only have one thing checked off, then there's still a reason to have a conversation with people, because most people think that their stress is being attracted to them, or that they have no control over it. For the most part, they do, if they think about it. And so it's a combination of finding a good remedy for whatever that stressor is, but also having to change some of a person's habits. If you keep, like, here's a good example. If you get bronchitis all the time when you get sick and you smoke cigarettes, it's going to always happen no matter what remedy I give you. But if you decide that you don't want to always get bronchitis, then you need to do something with your lifestyle, which would be to not smoke. And we give you a remedy, and we can almost, assure that you're going to do better without the smoking. So it's like if you're only eating sugar and fried foods and you have indigestion, a remedy's not going to fix that if you keep offending your body with those things. You laugh, but people don't
No,
get it.
I
And
laugh because I understand that people don't get it, and
but that's why I look so smart sometimes when I do an interview with people, because I get to see that bigger picture. It's like the 10,000-foot view, right? I see people's lives and I see what they're doing to themselves, and I try to constructively, gently, and slowly help them to see how important it is to do some self-care and how to start getting that done.
yeah. At one point, you mentioned obviously your speed reading contributed to getting the license to practice this.
Mm-hmm.
So how did it? How do you learn it? There are so many remedies you just mentioned. I'm assuming it's almost like a dictionary where you need to learn every single remedy, or how does it work?
It's not easy. I'll be honest, it is not an easy profession. But there are a lot of people that do learn how to prescribe just for their families for those kinds of, illnesses that come up, that pop up quickly, the acute things. And you can get it mostly from reading books. There's so many books on homeopathy that you can, with different remedy recommendations in them. The National Center for Homeopathy, when I was on their board last year, we created a document. It's a huge book. It's an awesome book called Homeopathy 101, How to Use a Homeopathic Kit at Home. And it has all these different chapters, like colds, coughs, and flus is one. And we have these comparison charts. And this is how you can decipher which remedy it is. It takes some practice. It takes some experience. But it is doable. And once you get familiar with the vocabulary, it's the background knowledge, right? That that these different remedies are good for these different things, it becomes much easier. And so I encourage people, there are Facebook study groups, there are even in-person study groups. Just look up homeopathy study groups, and you'll be able to maybe join one and learn from other people that know what they're doing.
Yeah, one of the dangers I definitely want to cover, considering this is also a very practical podcast, is that when you do homeopathy, Jesus, I'm having trouble with the words. It's getting late.
Homeopathy.
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 Yeah.
It's okay.
So when you're practicing that, maybe it pops up more in the news or YouTube, but the people that practice it, I notice sometimes tend to dismiss, actual doctors and everything. And obviously, in some cases, I've experienced it. You experienced it as well. Like traditional medicine just fails us, but at the same time it doesn't fail us all the time. So how do you combine, actually doing, you said it yourself, it's like an extra to traditional medicine, but how do you know when to do this and when to do traditional medicine?
Okay, so I first want to make it clear that every health practitioner has a toolbox. Okay, so mine is mostly my ability to see the bigger picture and homeopathic medicine. A naturopath, on the other side, naturopaths are people that can use some homeopathic medicine, but mostly their forte is in vitamins and supplements and testing and allergy, understanding how the body reacts to allergies, and that's what they are expert in. So that's their toolbox. A chiropractor, their toolbox is adjusting the spine and the neck if you have headaches or back pain. So that's their toolbox. And then you have a medical doctor, their toolbox are tests, pharmaceuticals, and surgery. So here, for example, a couple of years ago, I was in a car accident. I ended up with a really bad concussion and a back pain. And I wanted to get into my orthopedist. I wanted them to do an x-ray, and if, whatever they would do. But I did not want the painkillers because I knew there were other things I could do. So to get an appointment took 2 weeks. And I'm like, I'm not going to wait 2 weeks to get out of pain. So in those 2 weeks, I took some homeopathic medicine to help with the bruising and the pain that I had. I went to a chiropractor and I got adjusted. I went to a massage therapist 3 times during those 2 weeks, and I went to acupuncture twice. By the time I went to the orthopedist, I was fine. I was thinking, why am I even going here? And I thought, all right, let me use the testing that they have. Let them do an x-ray to make sure my back is okay and that the spine didn't get chipped or whatever. And that's what they did, and I was fine. And so it's kind of like you have to know what your situation is and what tools do you want to treat it with. So that's kind of my take on it. And that there, if I'm in a car accident, I want all the drugs they're going to give me. I want all the surgery and I want all the testing. That's great stuff. But if I'm depressed, help me deal with my depression. Help my body right itself. Don't put me on an antidepressant. That's my thinking, is that's a limit, in my opinion, that most of the people that have been depressed, been on antidepressants, and then have the horrible part of getting off it after 20 years, and then they get off it and they realize if they had only done the things that they're doing now to help themselves, they probably would have never gone on those antidepressants. And so I'm not saying that they're bad. I think they're good for short-term use, but they end up being used for year after year after year. And so it's an abusive situation, in my humble opinion.
Yeah. I think what's very important to take, I've never had that summary that you just gave, and it really puts things into perspective. I think what's important to know, especially if, listeners, young entrepreneurs or something beginning their journey, it's important to realize what everybody does, be aware of that, and make sure that your health just like you had that car accident, go to the appropriate people to do their specialty, but also, use doctors for the testing and whatever when it gets like really bad and you don't know what is actually happening. That way you actually have an overview. So yeah, I like that. Anything, we're obviously kind of already starting to wrap up, but anything that, very practical people need to know about, that pops up often with, entrepreneurs or something that come to you, anything they need to know or might be afraid of before trying what you do?
Are you talking about homeopathy or speed
Yeah,
reading or just being an entrepreneur,
homeopathy.
period?
Well, I'll ask that question after, but homeopathy for now.
So I'm not sure I understand the question. You want to know if somebody who comes to me for homeopathy who might be an entrepreneur?
Yeah, or just somebody who's an overachiever, working a lot, and is
That's a
not,
different remedy.
yeah, is not sure about trying homeopathy. What are some of the objections that pop up, and how do you deal with that and make them feel more comfortable about it?
So I don't want to make anybody do anything that they're not comfortable doing. I try to educate people. I run these virtual events right now. They're virtual. They used to be in person, called Tea with a Homeopath. And it's basically, I start off, we all get together on Zoom, and obviously I'm the main person. But I just start off with, like, what is a remedy? What does it look like? How do you dose it? And then I just say, so, as I go along here, I have certain things I want to make sure to cover, but I ask, what are your questions? What do you want to know? And so once they start to ask their questions and they get, the, like, what are they made out of? And, how do I take them? And that kind of thing. And then they go, okay, that's not so bad. And especially when I compare a remedy that's made out of energy medicine onto a sugar pellet versus a chemical that you would take, like in Benadryl or in Tylenol or something, or, you get medicine from your doctor, and most people don't ask, what is this? They just say, okay, I'll take it. But if you look at the composition of it, even, I know this is controversial, but you look at what goes into vaccines, there's all kinds of extra stuff. It's like if you only knew what you're getting injected into your body, you might think twice, because that's not good for the long term overall. So it's like, it's good that people want to know. But when I show them how inane it is, nobody dies from homeopathy. If you take a wrong remedy, it just won't work. It has to resonate with your vital force or your energy of your body for it to work. That's why it's so individualized. So usually people start in homeopathy with a remedy called arnica because it's available over the counter. People typically have an issue where they have aches and pains. They've overexerted themselves. They picked up something too heavy and their back hurts now. Arnica, or they're sportsmen and they get injured on the sports field. Arnica is like the gateway drug, if there is such a thing, into homeopathy, where it's like, wow, that arnica works. And once you realize that that's homeopathy, you're like, oh, wow, maybe could try this other stuff too, because it doesn't give me indigestion. It doesn't, go through my liver, and it's inexpensive, all that stuff. So, yeah. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, they definitely did. Also, yeah, so then as we're wrapping up now, we obviously went through a hell of a journey going into speed reading to healing. But I think the overarching story, when we zoom out, is you being an entrepreneur who started her own journey, especially after you quit and decided to do the program on your own. What are some, and that's kind of how we started the conversation as well. What are some of the things, looking back at everything that you learned, that truly, helps you for young women or young entrepreneurs in general, trying to do things on their own, just like you wanted to do your program on your own?
I would say there are two things that pop to my mind. One is, don't believe all the people in your life that tell you that what you're doing isn't going to work. Because there are people who are doubters that just think, are you sure that's what you want to be doing? It's not that lucrative, or who's going to want that? But if you really feel strongly about it, then it's worth giving it a try. Because if you don't do it, you'll always be mad or upset that you didn't try. And the other is that if you're saying, I really want to do this, but I need money, I need a computer, I need technology, I need to go to this conference, whatever it is, and you don't have the funds, trust in yourself enough to get a small loan if needed, either from a small business administration or just a loan from your bank or a loan from a friend, because you're pretty confident that if you have these tools, they're going to move you to that next level. It's not like you need money for a wardrobe. That's a different thing. But if you need a new computer to make your business work, get a loan for $5,000 and get the computer up and running, get all the software on it that you need, and really make it happen. Don't say, oh, I couldn't do it because I didn't have a computer. It's like, take that risk because you trust yourself and believe in yourself enough to do it. And I think I did two $10,000 loans over my years, and it paid. It was useful. It was very useful.
I would add to that because I've seen it also crash and burn very often. I would add to that validate the thing that actually works. So put up an advertisement or something. See that you actually have clients coming in before taking that loan, because I've actually done that as well. But I would borrow from a friend, and I would always make sure that I 100% could afford to pay back that loan if I would take it over a span of a couple of months, of course. Never from a bank or something like that, just, to buy something big in the beginning of my journey. But at that point, I knew, for instance, no matter what happens, I'd be able to pay back in 6 months or in 10 months or in whatever. So I wouldn't, just take 10K from a friend and be like, I'm gonna make the next Facebook or something.
It has to
So
be
it, yeah.
pretty, again, active, mindful, and conscious about what you're doing.
But we get a lot of people listening as well, so I want to emphasize, like, be careful, and validate the product first. And then I really agree, and this first time that it popped up, this advice, which is super valuable. At some point, you do have to take that step. And it's always going to pop up in that journey, whether you are going for an investor or you are, loaning from a friend. It always pops up, and sometimes you just gotta believe in yourself. So I'm really happy that you mentioned that. Very good advice.
Thank you. I try.
Cool. Last thing that I always ask the audience, requests this, any good books that you recommend on the topics of speed reading, as well as life, nonfiction as well, or homeopathy?
Oh my. Ah, for speed reading, I think, I like my own books. What can I say? I think those are valuable. I would say,
Where can
oh,
people get them? Can they get them on Amazon?
I would, right now, the 10 Days to Faster Reading is available online through Amazon, yes. And I also have the ebook version because I have the ebook rights. The Idiot's Guide, you might find a couple of used copies. It just went out of print, unfortunately, and I have the ebook rights, and I'm just in the process of transferring it into an ebook version, but it's not quite out yet. So those two, or the audiobook for 10 Days to Faster Reading is always available through Audible. In terms of, I didn't realize
Those
this
are two
question.
different. Those are two different books. So, what do
Yeah,
you teach in each book, and which one should people get first if they only want to get one?
that's a really good question. I'm going to say the 10 Days to Faster Reading, um, only because it has readings with questions so people can validate that, whereas the Idiot's Guide is more timing and self-evaluation of comprehension in the way that the practice works. They're both useful. So it's really hard to say. And the 10 days book is also a part of my online course, so they also get that if somebody decided to get online. The ebook version is available as a free download as part of the course. So, I mean, if you think you'll ever take the course, you might want to wait and get the ebook on the course. Yeah, yeah.
And any,
So
yeah, and the Idiot's Guide. What do you describe in there? What are some things that you explain?
So when I wrote the Idiot's Guide, it was basically I was not allowed to violate my own copyright from the 10 Days book. So I never looked at the 10 Days book when I wrote the Idiot's Guide, and I kind of reworked what I felt people needed. It was about 7 or 8 years after the 10 Days book. And so it has a little bit more, it has more pictures in it it shows you the visual on using your hands or a card. It has some different sections, a little more updated sections, and the timed exercises are different as well. So it's it's a nice complement to the 10 Days book, but one or the other might be enough for someone to go through. I don't think you need to exhaust every single book on the market to say that I now can speed read. I think you can find a couple of books that are out there to get some good information.
And what are some other books that really influenced your career?
Um, wow, I wished I had known this question before because I realized there's so many different books. I've also been very intrigued and interested in time management, and I've also been teaching it. had been teaching it for a good 10, 15 years, in addition to doing the speed reading, because it's also a good productivity tool. And so I think any book that's going to teach you how to be more efficient, especially for entrepreneurs, how to prioritize, how to, work-life balance is important, and how to get the most out of your day, and don't check email first thing in the morning, that you need to do something really important first before you check your email, because email will sidetrack you. And so there's, don't check email first thing in the morning. Julie Morgenstern, who's an organizer, wrote that book. I think I have an affinity to Barbara Hemphill, who had Taming the Paper Tiger and her material in the productiveenvironment.com. She's got some really good stuff for getting organized. I'm very much into how to do things better and more efficiently. And so that's a lot of what I focus on, are those kinds of books. And so for homeopathy, though, there's one book that is a great first read, and it's actually free online. You can't print it, but it's free, called Beyond Flat Earth Medicine. And it's by Dr. Timothy Dooley. And it just explains homeopathy and how it can work.
Beyond Flat Earth Medicine?
Beyond Flat Earth Medicine.
Well, why is it called? Is it like a pun or something?
No, it's a book, Beyond Flat Earth Medicine. And I think you'll find it to be very useful.
And what is it about? What does it describe?
It basically just is a good introduction to homeopathy. It just tells you, what is it, and he's a doctor, and he explains how he got involved in it, and then how homeopathy works and where it came from. Dr. Hahnemann in the late 1700s, early 1800s, and how remedies are made, how they can be used. It's just a very quick read and very useful. Yeah.
Cool. And that's the book that got you into homeopathy?
No, it's just a good primer. It's a really good basic read. It's the first book that I give to anybody, especially in my study groups. It's the first book they read, to just, get the curiosity going.
Okay. So, because it's like a book that's 40 years old now, or?
No. It's not that old, I don't believe. It's a good book.
Okay, cool.
You can find it online, Beyond Flat Earth Medicine by Dr. Timothy Dooley.
Nice. I'll check it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But no, thank you so much for kind of mentioning the books. I'm going to check out some of them. I learned a ton. We kind of need to wrap up. Probably, tens of thousands of other questions that will pop up, but maybe, we'll invite you back or something.
Oh, thank you.
Any last things that you want to mention to the listeners, or where people can find you? Any last tips?
Well, I appreciate that, and if people do want to reach out, they can find me on my websites, revitupreading.com, REVITUP reading.com, or Homeopathy Healings with an S, homeopathyhealings.com. So depending on which area of my life you're interested in is where you would go. And both of them do have free webinars on speed reading homepage. There's a free webinar called Getting Started Speeding Up Your Reading. And then in homeopathy, on my event page, is just like what everyone wants to know about homeopathy. And I do like 45 minutes of both of those. They're free, and anybody can get that. So you could learn more that way, which I think you'll find hopefully useful.
Nice. Well, then thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. It was really exciting
My pleasure.
To get to know
Thank you so much for having me. I hope somebody interviews you, though, at some point, because you're really interesting, too, by the way.
You. I actually used to do a lot of speeches, and then at one point it got so much I just stopped. I had like 2 TEDx speeches, and then people started flying me over. And at that point, my company started scaling. So I was like, enough. I have to focus on my team now. So my team speaks a lot now, but I stopped doing it. I do my podcast. I love it.
And you're doing great. Thank you.
But yeah, that's it. Thank you so much. And hopefully I'll see you on the next episode. If you like this episode, you can check out our most recent one here. And if you haven't already, make sure you click here to subscribe and see the next one. But if you're interested in more tips and tricks, then make sure to join our Facebook group where you can find thousands of like-minded people and you get direct access and support to